This is the 5th of March, 2022. We're in DeLand, and we are interviewing Dr. Marvin Dunn, son of DeLand. So tell us about your early childhood, some of your earliest memories.
Well, I was born in June of 1940. Roosevelt was still president. Pearl Harbor hadn't happened. I was born in a shed that was behind the house that my mom and my grandmother worked for, the folks who owned that place, across from Lake Gertie. And when I was about 5 or 6, we moved into DeLand. This was a little bit outside of DeLand, on South Julia Avenue. My grandmother rented a house and bought a house, actually, 417 South Julia. She would remind you anytime you might need to be reminded that she had her own house. She didn't rent. My parents rented a house right next to my grandmother's house on South Julia Avenue, right off Adele and Euclid. Just a block or so from Euclid High School, which is where I went to high school.
Euclid was kindergarten through 12?
Yes, Euclid went all the way first grade through 12. My mother went to Euclid, graduated from Euclid. So yes, that school has been serving the black community for a long time.
So yes, and your mother and your grandmother lived in that neighborhood.
Correct.
Before them, were there other members of the family living there?
No, they were the first of our family that moved into DeLand.
Okay, all right, just to get that clear. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what was your family life like?
Well, my dad picked oranges. He dropped out of high school. I don't think he even got to high school. Had a spat with a teacher. He lived in Glenwood, a couple of miles outside of DeLand. He and my mom married, I think, 1938. She lived in DeLand at the time, and they had 5 sons, myself and 4 brothers, James, Levon, William, and Raymond, and myself. And growing up in DeLand was just, I didn't know about segregation as a child. I saw it, but I didn't really appreciate what that all meant. I knew where we couldn't go. I knew that we had to go, when we went to the courthouse, to the bathroom, I think we had to go around the back. I think the colored bathrooms were back there. And I remember the segregated water fountains. I remember having to sit in the back of the city bus. My mother would take us for rides from DeLand to Sanford just to have something to do on a Saturday night when my dad was out being dad. But sitting us all in the back of the bus, seeing the sign saying colored seats from rear whites. So I grew up in a very segregated DeLand. The only time that I didn't feel my blackness was during the Christmas parade down Woodland Boulevard. And everybody showed up, and you just got whatever space you got to when you got there. That's where you sat and watched the parade. So I saw white and black people mixed together during the DeLand Christmas parade down Woodland Boulevard. And then it was back to Blackberry, our neighborhood, and I guess white folks went back to their neighborhoods.
So the Christmas parade was a big deal to you.
It was a very big deal. The thing, when I think back on it now, my dad had 5 sons to raise, picking oranges, and my mother was having kids, so she really didn't work. But every Christmas, that tree was full. We had everything else everyone else had. We did not feel that we were deprived or poor. I never felt that. But I felt bad for my dad having to get on the back of that orange truck on those cold mornings to go out to these groves and pick oranges. And I think back how much he had to have worked to have us be taken care of as well as we were before we moved to Miami.
So your father worked the citrus groves in the winter?
Yes.
And then in the summer?
The summers were a problem because there was no work. The citrus industry produced in the wintertime. So my dad devised a plan for us to go from DeLand to Long Island, New York, a place called Hicksville, to pick potatoes for farmers on Long Island. And we did that for the first time in 1949. Dad bought an old car and we drove, took 3 or 4 days to get to New York. That was a memorable trip because there was no interstate. You couldn't use the bathrooms. You couldn't buy, well, you could buy food in restaurants, but you had to go to the back, or there was a window where they would pass food out to black people. My dad wouldn't stand for that. So for the 2.5 days or 3 days that it took us to get to New York, we carried our food with us. My mother would cook a big pot of beans and rice and chicken or something, and we would eat that. Going to the bathroom, you stopped and went in the woods. Which for boys, that wasn't a big deal, but my mom had to do that. And that, when I think back on it, even those moments were hurtful to remember that.
Tell us about your school.
I was good in school. As a matter of fact, because we went up on the season, as they call it, the migratory season, 3 times, we got better education in New York those 2 or 3 months that we were there, and we would come back to DeLand and go to school here. We would be ahead of our kids, our peers here in DeLand, because what we were taught in New York schools was just more advanced, which also is why my brother and I were behind and felt bad in those white schools. The only black kids in those schools could not keep up with the white kids, but when we came back to DeLand, we were ahead of the kids in our own school. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Stokes. I had another teacher named Mrs. Williams. I had a science teacher, Nathaniel Jackson. Oh my goodness. Prof. Davis was my favorite. He was really like a mentor for a lot of black boys at the time. Very, very affable, very, very strict, but also very loving. My teachers were loving, loving teachers who did far more than they had to do with very little. I was one of the students that they would send over to DeLand High to get the used textbooks from the white school and the used science equipment, and to bring it back to our school. This is in the 50s, 1950s, when that sort of thing was legal. And that felt bad, to tell you the truth. I didn't like that we had to get books that had writing all in them and pages ripped out, but nobody questioned that in those days.
So tell us about the test, your senior year of high school.
Well, I never got to my senior year. I got to go to college out of the 11th grade. The Ford Foundation was trying to find good black students in the South to have them admitted to college early by taking a test that they gave across the South. And the test was offered at Euclid, and my principal, I think Mr. Henson was his name, said, "Marvin, we had to go to Daytona to Bethune-Cookman to take this test, because several schools in the county had to do that." And I didn't want to go, because I had a date, I had a girlfriend. Go where? Daytona on the school? No, I don't. And he said, "You will go." So the next morning I was on the bus. We go to Daytona, and I took the test and just picked Morehouse. Had never really heard of Morehouse College. I just picked it. I thought I would be lucky if I got to FAMU playing drums, but I knew I wasn't that good. So I had no real plans to go to college. I took the test. Maybe 2 months later, my grandmother, I was staying with my grandmother at the time. The rest of my family was in Miami by that time. I had to come back and stay with my grandmother. And this letter had come. I paid no attention to it. She finally gave it to me. "You need to read this. Something may be important." So I opened the letter, and it's a full scholarship offer from the Ford Foundation to go to Morehouse College. And if I had waited another 2 weeks, the offer would have been withdrawn. So that's how I got to Morehouse, and I was reborn when I got there. It was just wonderful. But 1957, I left DeLand on a Greyhound bus, back seat, to ride to Atlanta to attend college.
Tell us about what happened on your ride to Morehouse.
On my ride to Morehouse, September 1957, I just turned 17. My parents took me to the Greyhound bus station, downtown DeLand, not downtown DeLand, but DeLand bus station. I'm sorry, I take that back. No. I left for college from Miami. My mom and dad took me to the bus station in Miami and put me on the back seat of that Greyhound bus and told me to stay there until that bus got to Atlanta the next day. This was a Sunday night. And they gave me a little brown bag lunch, and I sat on the back of the bus. They got off. And when the bus got to Fort Lauderdale, I got up and moved to the center of the bus. Should not have done that. I knew better. But I tell you, Kathy, it felt better. I don't know why. Same bus, same, but sitting in the middle felt better. So, I rode that Sunday night, and there were white people getting on that bus during the course of the evening sitting behind me. And the next morning, there was a group of white high school students. The bus was in Waycross, Georgia, and they were using the Greyhound bus to get to school, a group of them. And they get on the bus, and they're just talking, chattering, and one of those girls, a white girl, sat down next to me. And that was the closest I had ever been to a white person, maybe except at the DeLand Christmas parade. And as soon as I started, as that girl sat down next to me, you could hear a pin drop on this bus. Everybody stopped talking. And finally someone said, "Nigga, get up. Get back there where you belong." And other people chimed in. And I was frightened. And a young Marine, a white Marine, he was in uniform, corporal, he stood up and asked, "Why are you all picking on him? He's not doing anything." And they turned on him. "Forget about me. You must be from the north. You must be a Jew. You don't know how we do things down here." So the bus driver we're outside of Waycross, he pulls the bus over at a service station, comes back, points at me, and says, "You're creating a disturbance on this bus, I'm putting you off." And he gave me my little cardboard suitcase and put me off at this gas station to wait for the next bus, which came about 4 hours later, and I got on that bus, and that's how I arrived in Atlanta in 1957.
So let's talk about your decision to be a naval officer and why you think you went that direction, and then just segue into talking about your career there.
My dad was in the Navy. He was a cook. At that time, in the 1940s, that was about as much as a black person could do in the Navy. I wanted to be a naval officer. After leaving, I wanted to do at least as well as my dad did in the military. I wanted to show him that I could achieve this. So following my graduation from Morehouse, 1961, I applied for officer candidate school in Rhode Island and was ultimately accepted after some difficulties trying to get there. But that's how I got to be an officer, 16 weeks of training at Newport. And then I was sent on to aircraft carriers. I hesitate because I should have and do have many pleasant memories of being in the Navy. I love being aboard ship. I was on the bridge. I was a bridge officer. I got to be, we ran the ship, an aircraft carrier. That was fun, but it was also extremely lonely. The Navy had very, very few black line officers, black officers who were on ships fighting ships, as opposed to black officers who were maybe dentists or lawyers or what have you. But aboard ship, the Navy was lacking seriously in black officers. And a comment about that had been made by President Kennedy during his inauguration, and the Chief of Naval Operations sitting behind Kennedy heard it. So the Navy was very sensitive to its absence of officers, relative absence of officers on fighting ships. So June 1963, before Kennedy was killed that November, he came to our ship to stay overnight. The president gives each branch of the service 24 hours where he or she comes and stays with them. So Kennedy chose to come out to our carrier from San Diego. He flew out to where we were. And I was given an assignment on the bridge, so I get to see the president because he was going to come up to the bridge. He flew out by helicopter from San Diego out to us about 100 miles offshore, and we're all ready for the president. Have been practicing for, listen, I will not give you the details of what the Navy goes through to impress the president. But there are 3 or 4 carriers, submarines, 20 ships, all practicing for months, firing off. Oh, we were ready for Kennedy. Anyway, he was late arriving on board, and my watch was over. The president had not arrived in the course of my watch. And as is customary, as the other officers did who were white, asked permission to leave the bridge. The captain, everyone else was allowed to leave, 3 other officers, and he told me to stay on the bridge. And that just doesn't happen unless you're fighting the ship. When your watch is over, you go below. And that singled me out. Everybody looked at me. Dunn doesn't have to go down, doesn't have to leave the bridge. So anyway, I did see the president, came up, late as he was, sat in the captain's chair. He was in excruciating pain. I could tell his face was he had a bad back. Um, and I looked at him just for a few seconds into his eyes, and he looked at me, and I thought we were both miserable. I didn't want to be on that bridge. I don't think he wanted to be on that bridge. And that was when I decided to get out of the Navy. I didn't, being the only one is overdone. There were 1,400 officers on that ship, and I was the only black officer on that carrier. Same thing with the second carrier I was assigned to. So I wanted to study psychology at my state university, University of Florida, Gainesville. I applied to be admitted to the doctoral program. I had earned a master's degree in education during my 2 years of shore duty in Chicago, near Chicago. And I wanted a doctorate in psychology from my own state university. Applied to UF. By that time I was on the second carrier, the Saratoga.
University of Florida?
Yes, UF. Applied from C. Got a letter back from UF, I think I still have it. Dear Lieutenant Dunn, the University of Florida does not accept Negro students into our graduate programs in psychology. However, if you're able to be admitted to any graduate program in psychology outside of Florida, the state of Florida will contribute to or will pay your tuition. And I'm in uniform in the Mediterranean. This is right around the time of the 6-Day War. This is not a comfortable time to be in the military. So I felt crushed. Tennessee, I applied there as well. It gave me a full ride, full scholarship, didn't pay a dime, and loved the experience of being at Tennessee. And then from Tennessee, I came back home and joined FIU in 1972.
You had so many different kinds of experiences. What was that like to transition into academia?
Academia was easy for me. I couldn't believe they gave me a paycheck to do that. I've been picking potatoes on Long Island, crawling on my hands, and this is it. The teaching was wonderful. I never entered a classroom and did not want to be there. But I joined FIU because FIU said that it was committed to community service, that the university should be involved in the community, doing things, not just academic research. That appealed to me. So I joined FIU and began various kinds of programs in the community to try to deal with race and ethnic conflict. This is going back to the early 70s. And then in 1980, there was a race riot in Miami. And 18 people died, most of them were black. Liberty City, the black section of Miami, one of the black sections of Dade County, of Miami, was in flames. And I want to know why that happened. What would make a community go crazy like that? So I wrote a book on that riot with a man named Bruce Porter. We co-authored a book on the 1980 riot. And when I did that book, I found that there was very little black history about Miami. I couldn't find out what happened here with black people before, other than just pictures of folks working in doing basic menial work. And that dearth of information made me shift towards history and away from psychology. Psychology would have been easier if I'd stayed in psychology. I wouldn't have been going to cemeteries of lynching victims. I wouldn't be talking to descendants of people who were lynched. I wouldn't be going to graves of children who were lynched in Florida. I would have avoided some of the ugly underside of Florida's history. But once you start digging and you find out all these things happen in our state, it's hard to stop. And listen, I don't let folks who are not from Florida knock Florida. Just like knocking my hammer on my mother. If it's not, I can knock it. I can criticize Florida. You're from New York. Keep your mouth shut. We can have our own history here without you having. So I'm very defensive about our state history because it's part of my life. But I also recognize and highlight some of the things that are easy to forget.
Like the lynchings.
Like the lynchings. I've been to Most places in Florida where major lynchings happen, including right around here. Well, I don't know if, I think there were one or two lynchings documented in Volusia County, but Orange County, Lake County, these areas in Central Florida, Alachua County, all have very, very violent racial histories. And most of those stories are covered up. And what I wanted to do was make films, write books, write stories, give talks about these things, not to make anybody feel guilty. That's one of the misunderstandings today about critical race theory. I teach black history, Florida history, Miami history as raw as it is, but not to make any white person feel guilty. Why would any white person listening to these stories today feel guilty? They didn't do anything. They didn't own slaves. I try to make the point that teaching the rough stories of history doesn't invite or should not invite anybody to be angry at anybody else. Let's find out what happened, why these things happen, and make sure that they don't happen again.
Tell us about your program, Roots in the City, and how rooted in your past that whole concept was.
My dad's mother, Cora Patterson Dunn, was a farmer. She had land out in Glenwood where she grew things, and my dad and his sisters had to work in my grandmother's farm, on that farm rather. And my dad picked up on that. So when we moved to Miami, even though we were now living in the city, we still had to learn how to raise vegetables, how to grow oranges, how to do basic things that my dad had done up here. There's a section in Miami called Overtown. It's the old historic black district that's now overrun with vacant lots and expressways coming through. So by the time that I'd been teaching at FIU for a few years, my sense was my students, most of whom were Hispanic, most of whom were white, just a few black students, but my feeling was that they're getting a free ride. These people need to go and do something in the community that makes a difference. It shows that they appreciate the fact that the state of Florida is paying for most of their education. So in my community psychology class, intro community psychology class, I offer my students an option. We're going to go to Overtown, we're just going to go into a vacant lot and start clearing and planting botanical plants, eventually put in vegetables. And if you want to participate in that for extra credit, you got to go 4 weekends, all day in that community, and bring your own tools, and that's what we're going to do. If you don't want to do that, then you can write a 30-page term paper, and that will excuse you from having to do it. And I did this maybe for, I don't know, 12, 13 years or so. I had 4 students do the term paper, and 3 of them were pregnant. So my students came to Overtown. It was quite a spectacle, but I didn't ask permission to plant on these vacant lots. We just did it. So I figured the state of Florida, they owned a lot of the land we were planting. I would just make them stop planting and put the druggies and the trash and all of that back on they never did that. So we just started planting, and then community groups started joining us. And eventually, we had this beautiful botanical garden alongside one of the expressways in Overtown. And one Saturday morning, I had about 40 students working, and there were some guys sitting across the sidewalk watching us. This is like 10:30 in the morning. There were 3 sheets to the wind drunk. And one of them said, "That sure is pretty stuff y'all putting in. Why don't you plant something we can eat?" So I thought, oh, yeah, he has a point. So we started putting in food gardens. We would plant collard greens mainly, cabbage, and just let people could just come and take what was planted. And that's how Roots in the City began, as a way to help people who couldn't afford fresh produce in the inner city to have a place where they could just go and get it for free. And then my daughter took over this whole idea, and she now has a nonprofit called Health in the Hood, and they're doing wonderful things all over the country, community gardens in urban areas all over the country.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You must be very proud.
I'm very proud of her. Most of my gardens are gone. Apartment buildings, gentrification, even more expansion of the expressway.
The ones in Overtown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're gone.
You've really been involved in community affairs in Miami, and I'd like to touch on you decided to run for public office.
That was yes, I did.
Where did that come from?
My mother would say, I should have slapped you before you did that, boy. I don't know. Fortunately, the votership of Miami was wise enough to not have me become a politician. It returned me to academia 3 or 4 times. But I was of the sense that if you weren't in politics, you can't change anything. You have to be inside the system to do that. But I was not a real politician at heart. I hated raising money. I hated begging. I hated wishy-washy positions. And much of what I had said as an activist, a lot of folks didn't like, white and black. So it was really a decision based upon a hope that was never realistic. I ran for mayor of the city of Miami in 1986, and that was the last effort any black person has made to run for that office in Miami. So it was the sense of jump into it, but I'm glad that I ended up remaining an academician.
One of your, well, I want to talk about Rosewood and what you've been doing there.
Okay. Rosewood, 1923 massacre. It was not an all-black town. There were a few white families there, but it was mostly a black town that was burned to the ground based on a charge that a black man had assaulted a white woman, which was not true. But the story played out. A mob was formed, and people were killed. We still don't know how many. And then everybody moved. All the black folks moved away. Everybody moved away overnight. A train came in and took several women and children out of Rosewood while the mob was burning this town down. And then about 20 years ago, I had a white partner, a guy from Live Oak, Florida. And he and I purchased 5 acres of Rosewood land, pristine land, just as it was in 1923. The railroad track ran right through our property. The rails are gone, but the rail bed is like a green tunnel running right through our property. And then I've been to Rosewood many, many times. I've made films about the Rosewood Massacre. And now I'm trying to find out where the black victims are buried. That's a big open question that I'm pursuing through my nonprofit, the Miami Center for Racial Justice. So I'm very much involved in Rosewood. When I go to Rosewood, the white folks know I'm there. I'm the only black person out there, so I just park my car up in the woods and as much as I can off the street. And I want to be fair. I really need to be fair about Rosewood. I have some wonderful neighbors in Rosewood. I do. One Saturday, I have to tell this story. I was on my property one Saturday. This is still a very highly wooded rural area, but there are white estates out there. People live out there. So one Saturday morning, I pulled my car way off the road, but this guy that run a truck pulled up with a gun rack in the back with a gun. So he yells out, "What are you doing out there?" So my heart jumps. I said, I'm inspecting this is my property. He said, "Your property? You own this property?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Oh, well, we take care of each other out here. You're a neighbor. Come by the house tomorrow. I'm having some of the guys over. Meet the family." His land is just a couple hundred yards from mine. The next morning, Saturday morning, I go over to meet him and his buddies. Again, I didn't know what to expect. 11 o'clock or so, they had been drinking before I got there. So I sit there on his porch with 3 other guys who were self-defined crackers. They said, "We're crackers. We're proud of it. People don't understand cracker culture. We're not racist. Do you believe in Jesus Christ?" I said, "Yeah." You believe in Jesus? I said, "Yeah, well, then you're all right with us. We don't care about your color. If you believe in Jesus Christ, you believe in Jesus, right?" "Oh, yeah, me and Jesus close," I said. I hadn't been to church in 3 years. But that was what it took to get these guys to say, "You're okay," and to tell me how unfair history has been to white people of Rosewood and not recognizing, and it is true, some of them helped, some of them protected people, but it didn't stop the mob from doing what they did. So I made friends with these guys. I have some neighbors up there who are okay. Others were just as well that I wasn't out there.
Before we end, I want to talk about the challenges at the moment with Black history and the teaching of it. But your institute, tell us about your institute.
Oh, the Miami Center for Racial Justice? After the George Floyd event took hold and the world noticed, it occurred to me this wonderful moment, tragic moment, but wonderful moment of awakening for a lot of people was great. But I wondered, how long will this last? Arthur McDuffie was the black man in Miami who was killed by several white police officers whose death led to the 1980, but the lack of justice in that case led to the 1980 riot. So I'm wondering, because in the 40 so years since that happened, I've gone to high schools, colleges in Miami, and asked, any of you know who Arthur McDuffie was? And they don't. Hands don't go up. My sense was the George Floyd event in 10 or 15, 20 years would be forgotten. That we need to save these stories as they happen, and that's why I started the Miami Center for Racial Justice, and I put up a web page that the center sponsors. It's donehistory.com. I really invite people to go there, including my history as a person born here and growing up in DeLand. So my decision was to have the center help me build out this website so that I could tell and preserve these stories that are easy to forget because they're so painful. So that's what we do.
We're in a period now where there's a big dispute over the teaching of Black history in schools and making children uncomfortable. The legislature even has some things pending on that. Is this backsliding, or what's going on here?
It's denial. If you teach children who are old enough to accept and be aware of the information about the Holocaust, what are they supposed to feel? Nothing? When you teach your kids about the way in which the Native Americans were really decimated in this country, what are you supposed to feel when you teach these things? Nothing? What about slavery? You teach about that system. What should students, white, black, or whatever, feel about that? So to say they shouldn't feel anything, I think, is a mistake. They should feel a connection as a human being. They should feel bad for what happened to the people who were victimized, but they should not feel guilty. It's not their responsibility. It's not the responsibility of their parents as to what happened 200 years ago. So my view of teaching critical race theory is to teach kids who are old enough, middle school and above, to understand what racism is, what it was, how it impacted our country, how it still impacts our country, and how we can get beyond it. So you can't do that without talking about what happened. And in my view, it's a very, very short-sighted view to think that kids can't handle these things, that we should not be teaching them these things, because they can and must.
At one point, you had an alternative school that you created.
Yeah.
Can you tell us briefly about that?
The alternative school that I created is called now it's called the Marvin Dunn Academy for Community Education. It's a full-fledged high school in Dade County. After that riot happened, and I was criticizing the Dade County school system because I saw so many kids on the streets participating in that violence. And I criticized the school system for not being able to hold on to kids better. And I thought, well, that's easy to criticize the school system. Why don't you show them how you would do it? So I started this academy with an attempt to have the school system mimic some of the things we were doing to hold on to more students. And so the academy was founded based upon that. The school system supported it, gave us teachers, and we had a wonderful time. The thing about that school was, Kathy, we told the kids that they chose to come. No one got sent there. They chose to come, and we offered a lot of very, very good incentives. We took kids to Jamaica, Washington, New York, Atlanta, if they performed. But we told them, and this school still operates, I hope, on this principle, that we run the school, you don't. You follow our rules or you don't stay here. And if you get into trouble, if you're not here by 8 o'clock in the morning, we're going to call your mama. And just that upped our attendance incredibly. You're going to call my mama every time you're not here on time and call your mother. And that kind of connect, we only had about 200 kids, so we could do that with a small school. And having that kind of on-hand contact with our students and loving teachers who understood but would not tolerate foolishness, we did very well as an alternative school. I'm very proud of that school.
And it carries your name.
It carries my name. Well, there's a risk in that. I can't mess up.
So
I got another few years to try to be really good. No promises on that.
That, I think, was one of the reasons why they never used anybody's name to name anything till after they were dead, so that in case they messed up, if they were contemplating it.
But my opinion about that was not asked. They just did it. But there it is. It's a full-fledged high school. I'm very proud of it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, what would you like your legacy to be?
That's a good question. What would I like my legacy to be? That I was a storyteller. I was a storyteller. And you can find my stories out there on the internet someplace if you bother to look. Of course, beyond that, my legacy is my family, my kids, 7 kids, 7 grandkids. That's my legacy too. Everybody is doing great, and as a granddad, I can just say, life is good.
When you come back to DeLand, what do you feel emotionally?
Well, when I come back to DeLand, I go out to Union Cemetery, where I was an hour and a half ago, to visit my parents. And I sit there for maybe an hour and just chat with them. My dad is where he wanted to be, where he wanted them to be, that beautiful setting. So when I come home, it's like coming to see my folks, my parents. And then I always go back to the old neighborhood in Blackberry, South Julia Avenue. And, you know, my boyhood comes back to me, because most of the time that I was in DeLand, I was a boy. And most people want to remember and do remember their childhood as being a wonderful time, and I do as well with mine. The things that I can mention that hurt me, that I saw that were not fair and were not good as a black person, I don't think made me a bitter person or an angry person. But I want my legacy to be that I told stories as best as I could with as much truth as I could find. That's me.